Well, good afternoon, Dr. Tui. Very good to see you. Thank you very much for making yourself available.
Not at
And
all.
I have a number of questions for you.
Hmm.
The first of which is, and I think it's a good place to start, um, when did you first meet Plato, and what impression did he make on you at the time?
Well, I first came across Plato when I was at school after I'd done my O levels in the sixth form, and we read a wide range of different Greek authors, um, and we actually read in Greek a whole dialogue by Plato. It's not very long. It's called the Ion, and it's not particularly well known, but it is actually a very interesting dialogue in which Socrates has an encounter with a man called Ion, who is a professional performer of Homer, called a rhapsode, and these people were highly regarded as experts because of their knowledge of Homer. And I was fascinated by the way Socrates made a complete fool out of this man. Um, and It's very funny because Ion is an extremely pompous person with a very high opinion of himself, and the characterization was delightful, and so I was really intrigued. Um, and obviously, I could see that there was more to it than just humiliating a famous rhapsode. They get onto the subject of uh, what poetry is and how it's related to knowledge. And these were questions that really excited me in my adolescence. I'd already started going to um, lunchtime sessions on philosophers like Kant and Descartes. But I just found Plato a lot more enjoyable, and there was no sort of off-putting technical jargon or mystification, which really sold him to me there and then. And I went on and then read at school the Apology and the Crito, I think, and that was it, really.
Thank you very much. And it sounds like you're also, and presumably had been for some while, studying ancient Greek and the classics at school. What was your experience of that area of study?
Well, I was very lucky to be sent to a very good traditional English school and this was at a time where Latin was actually compulsory at O level. So uh, and I just was very good at just have well sounds terribly conceited, but that was one of the subjects I was good at. Wouldn't say I was a particularly bright student, but I was good at Latin and Greek, and I'd really been sold on classics more by the languages than by the actual civilization. So I didn't go into classics because I had any knowledge of the ancient world. That came as a sort of pleasant surprise later on.
And then bringing us up to today, I mean, what do you think is the reason that Greek and the other classical languages should be taught in schools today?
Well, I think that there's no getting away from the fact that translation leaves a lot out. And if you can learn the languages, and I recognise that it's sometimes quite difficult, but if you've got the time and you can learn them, then you'll get a lot more out of reading any ancient author by reading them in the original. But I would say that's particularly true of Plato. He is actually one of the main joys of learning Greek is to read Plato. Plato's Greek was recognized in the ancient world as particularly wonderful. I think they talked about bees hanging around his mouth, didn't they? Because it's dripping with honey.
Mhm. And then perhaps remaining with the schools
Mhm.
of today, why do you think Plato should be taught in schools?
Well, I think first of all, I think it's very important that we have a good understanding of where we've come from, and therefore, in the case of uh, our schools, I think the whole classical tradition is an important thing that we shouldn't lose sight of. And I think Plato is a really important part of that. Bear in mind that he was one of the few ancient authors that has survived in his entirety. There is no Plato thing we know of that hasn't survived. Um, Most authors, that's not true of. So he was incredibly prestigious in the ancient world, had a huge following. People like Cicero, for example, uh, regarded Plato as well worthy of imitation. Cicero wrote Platonic dialogues or dialogues in the style of Plato. So I think uh, Plato is an important part of any study of classics. But quite apart from all that, I think in terms of what can young people now get out of it, I think if they can actually be encouraged to read some Plato, they will develop some really good habits. He encourages a great respect for civilized, reasonable debates. I think that is something that is really important in any period of the world, but particularly nowadays, encouraging civilized debate, but also the power of reason, the idea that we all have a capacity to reason and proceed in a by uh, a joint enterprise of two people exercising reason together. It seems to me that is very much the a model of education that should be encouraged, where the teacher and the pupil are together engaged in a rational um, journey. Again, just give you a little um, idea about this, which I got from Plutarch. So Plutarch, who is a Greek writer of the second century AD, about a good 400 or 500 years after Plato, said that in one of his works that Plato humanized philosophy. He made it human. And I'm currently reading Aristophanes' Clowns. I don't know if you know that play, but
Yes, indeed.
uh, it's one of the earliest depictions of Socrates.
Mm.
And Socrates is depicted as this sort of mad professor floating around in a basket, talking utter nonsense. And if you want to join his school, the Frontisterium, you have to be initiated. You have flowers sprinkled on you, and that sort of that seems to me to sum up perhaps the worst form of philosophical education that obtained in Greece before Plato came along. And what I think to understand what Plato was up to, he was sort of rejecting all that. The Aristophanes version of Socrates is not Plato's Socrates. He was offering something that is not a mystery, that is not a sort of jealously guarded secret just for the initiates. It's something that is available to anyone who has the power of reason. And it seems to me that is a really important element in any modern education.
Well, thank you very much indeed. And then, what of the way that Plato's taught in schools today? What's your assessment of that?
Well, first of all, in this country, I'm delighted that he's taught at all, and obviously he is regarded as a part of the teaching of classics. That there's you can do him at Greek A level or classical civilization. Um, Unfortunately, I don't think the the syllabuses that we have at the moment put enough emphasis. Certainly, classical civilization doesn't put enough emphasis on forcing you to actually grapple with a text by Plato. There's too much description of his sort of Plato's theories as a sort of background to a topic. So I would say if we could improve uh, classroom practice now, it would be by actually finding more opportunities to give children an actual text of Plato and leave them to see what they make of it. It doesn't require much input from a teacher. That's one of the great beauties of Plato. It doesn't require that much input um, because, as I say, it's very clear and simple. And these are the sort of virtues, I think, of rational debate is keeping it clear and simple and not using terminology which is designed to confuse and befuddle.
Thank you very much. So in a way, I think you've answered my second question following from that, which is, well, what could be done to improve the way Plato is taught in schools? But apart from presenting text to the children and having them engage with them directly, is there anything else? And there's no limit to what could be done now. Ideally, how would you like to see the teaching of Plato in schools in the future?
Well, if we had an ideal world, then there would be more opportunities to learn ancient Greek in schools, I think. I mean, Latin is doing quite well in this country. Greek is sort of bobbing along, but I think if it could be given a bit of a shot in the arm, that would be great. Because I think if children can actually read Plato in the original Greek, that's a huge benefit. Uh, the other thing I suppose that is connected is debating. Debating in schools, I think, is an extremely valuable thing to do, and that can often arise from consideration of a Plato topic. A lot of the um, ideas in Plato would make very good debates. For example, in the Republic, Socrates advocates a form of communism. So that seems to me a very good way to debate communism as a political idea without sort of getting immersed in any of the modern complications that have arisen in the last century or so to do with it. So, sort of communism as a basic principle of how you organize a society. There you go. It's in the Republic.
Thank you very much. So I just want to broaden out the discussion now to
Mm-hmm.
society at large. And what relevance do you think Plato has to the modern age and the sort of issues that we have to face today? How can he help us?
Well, I think that's a very good question, and there's a sort of slight implication that um, one will struggle a bit, and I think that's fair because I think um, one of the people that impressed me most on the subject of classics was a guy called Robert Bulgar, who taught me at university, who wrote a book on classics, and he looked at the way that the great heyday of the Victorian age, when individuals were great achievers and inventors, gave way in the 20th century to people placing far more value on institutions and these huge organizations and institutions that have really noble
Hmm.
goals, climate change, and so on and so forth. But that does mean modern life. The drawback there is modern life becomes incredibly bureaucratic because that means really human beings are now valued more for how they contribute to goals set by organizations. And that leads to a sort of fragmentation, I think, experienced by people. Whereas the beauty of Plato is it as they recognized in the Renaissance, you can build an understanding of how you can perfect human nature by studying Plato or studying the things Plato studied. And that is a very good antidote to, I think, the modern bureaucratic ethical fragmentation that is all around us. So that would be my basic approach for bringing Plato back into the world as a correction. We don't have to take this sort of bureaucratic virtues lying down. We can sort of fight back with a return to the values of the Renaissance humanists.
Thank you very much. And then my final question, I'm going to bring it right back to you now.
Yeah.
So what does Plato mean for you? How has it impacted on your life?
Well, I did you may say I'm a bad example because my PhD was in Aristotle. So you may say, well, he's the direct enemy of Plato, but he's not at all. That they have a huge amount in common. And I particularly value in Aristotle the idea that there is such a thing as objectivity, that there is right and wrong. You can have knowledge on matters of morality. And all of that, of course, is what Aristotle got from Plato. I mean, in some ways, if you want to evaluate Plato as an educator, what better achievement is there than he produced Aristotle, who was at his academy for 20 years?
Mm. Well, thank you very much. We've covered a great deal, and there's a lot to think about in what you've said. And I greatly appreciate yourself making the time available. So,
Well, thank you very much for speaking to me. I've enjoyed it immensely.